So this morning's discussion on Seinfeld will be the juniormen. Who wants to start? So everybody looks at each other, stares down. Who's in the camp?
Character-wise, I mean, I feel like Roy is the one that jumped out to me. Obviously, he had like an identifiable stressor. He mentioned that it had been going on for weeks where he like couldn't eat. So they didn't go beyond that as far as like CE caps, but I thought that at least he might have been dealing with like an adjustment disorder.
So adjustment disorder for the DSM is when a causal relationship is established between a stressor and the patient's, in this case, mood. Define for me the operational definition of the DSM.
Within 3 months.
Within 3 months of a stressor onset, and
It has to impair social functioning, interpersonal relationships. That's some functional aspect to it.
Symptoms will last for 6 months.
right. So again, stressor onset or stressor on, symptom onset within 3 months. Right. If you present with a depressed mood to a psychiatrist and identify a stressor that you failed out of medical school. When did the symptoms start? Last week. When did you actually go in front of the academic standing committee? Oh, back in 2015. Got it. Right, so there's got to be a causal relationship established, and that is an onset of symptoms within 3 months of an identified stressor. Once that stressor dissipates, once it extinguishes, we would not expect then the symptoms to continue beyond 6 additional months. Right? So take the stressor away and the symptoms go away. And that's an adjustment reaction or adjustment disorder. And that same temporality is established for not only mood but anxiety as well as a disturbance of conduct or some combination there. Right? So that's the adjustment disorders. At this point though, this may actually be something beyond an adjustment disorder. And there you have to think major depressive disorder. And even though Larry David doesn't write specific signs and symptoms, CE caps, into this script, there's reason to believe because of the significant weight loss in the time course that Roy's character is depressed. Now, there may be a transition between A and B, that is between the adjustment disorder and the major depressive episode. Usually, I'm not going to be able to get this right today, but formally it was referred to as a complicated adjustment disorder. But the DSM really right now doesn't focus too much on any formal definition of that bridge that may connect. Just know that it may not happen as abruptly or neatly as it would appear on the shelf exam. Okay? So that's Roy, major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder is one of several, well, I used to be able to say mood disorders, but that chapter of the DSM has been separated to between the depressive disorders and the bipolar and related disorders. Give me some other examples of depressive disorders. Dysthymic, right? Dysthymic or dysthymic disorder. Dysthymic disorder is defined how?
It's like 2-year duration at least of like mood symptoms that wouldn't qualify for like a major depressive episode. Probably like more days than not feel them.
Right. So depression and related symptoms for most of the day, for more days than not, over a 2-year period, and no more than 2 weeks without symptoms. So it's a chronic form of depression. If you look at the signs and symptoms, for all intents and purposes, they're CE caps. However, on shelf exams, because of the consistency with the DSM, there is one symptom that's added to dysthymia that is not in the definition of major depression. You know what that one symptom is? It's self-esteem. Self-esteem. And self-esteem replaces suicidality. That's the big one. There's one other small change with regard to MDD versus dysthymic disorder. Ignore it. The biggie is self-esteem. In clinical practice, individuals who are depressed, MDD, can certainly suffer from poor self-esteem. There's no doubt about it. But it's not in the defining criteria. And similarly, people who have dysthymic disorder can endure suicidal ideation. but it's not in the defining criteria. Shelf exams like to focus on that, so you see a chronic form of depression, and the word self-esteem, hyphenated, is in your clinical vignette. Think dysthymia disorder, then look for the specific criteria with regard to the chronicity, the rule of twos. All right, the bipolar and related disorders. But we don't know if Roy has a bipolar or related disorder because the presentation of any of these conditions can look exactly like Roy, right? And we only arrive at a diagnosis of a bipolar or related disorder when we take a history and we find out what?
Manic episode.
Right.
Manic episode.
That's it, history of manic episode. So the patient may not demonstrate any signs or symptoms of mania, but through the history, the single best diagnosis may still be a bipolar or related disorder. Bipolar 1, what is it? That's it, the single episode of mania. Other than that which is substance induced or that which is due to an underlying medical condition, what is the only other possible explanation someone may have who has had a manic episode at some time in the past? There's only one other condition. Otherwise, it's got to be bipolar 1. Schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type, is the only other condition it could possibly be. Bipolar 2, what is it?
Defined by hypomanic episode
And
and major depressive episode.
major depressive episodes. Like there, you have to have alternating episodes. These episodes last for months at a time, without treatment. So be careful of mood swings that occur within a 24-hour period. That's not a truly established mood episode. Mania, about 3 months, maybe depression, 3 to 6 months. Okay, not an hour or two. So bipolar 2 is defined through, you said a hypomanic episode. How do we differentiate then hypomania from mania? Duration, right? So the magic 7-day period. 7 days or longer, mania. Shorter than 7 days, hypomania. What else?
At least 4 days.
Right.
Doesn't cause significant impairment.
Yeah, so not only quantitatively, but there's a qualitative difference as well, in that it is not clinically significant by definition. What is the only disorder? Actually, there's two now in the DSM-5, thanks to the DSM-5. There are two other disorders that are defined by their not being clinically significant. Well, that's, yeah, you got me. There's two and a half.
Okay.
Cyclothymia, because cyclothymia is also defined through hypomania. So you got me there. Technicality, good to go. Future psychiatrist. Two others.
Personality trait versus disorder.
In a way, yes. Okay, I can give you that. So the other two, you guys are good today. You're on for a Friday. This is good. The other two are actually mild neurocognitive disorder, which differentiates, which is differentiated from major neurocognitive disorder, formerly known as dementia. And the other is delusional disorder. That's a half point, because it's really that the individual has a clinically impactful illness, but except for the impact of the delusion, other aspects of their life are actually intact. Right, so that's a little bit of a twist. All right, so then finally, what is cyclothymia? Since we said the C word.
It's 2 years of hypomanic and depressive episodes. Symptoms, hypomanic symptoms and depressive symptoms.
Depressive
but they don't
symptoms.
meet the criteria for an episode of either,
Of either what?
like major depressive episode or hypomanic.
Exactly.
episode.
That's exactly right. Otherwise, sometimes the term minor depression is used as well. There are depressive symptoms that don't reach criteria for major depressive disorder. All right, so that's Roy. Any other thoughts here about Roy? Any other characters you want to discuss?
Talking about George. Originally, he was making fun of Roy's art, and his triangle art, and then in the end, once he hears that he's getting sick and the prognosis is poor, he turns out, does a complete 180 and decides to spend his winnings, if you will, all $1,900 on his art. So he's kind of displaying some altruistic traits, as well as, I think, reaction formation, because he doesn't really want to do it, but he's doing like the polar opposite by acting and buying his art.
Okay. So if we believe this is an unconscious process, altruism and reaction formation, different defense mechanisms that can be discussed to explain George's behavior, might there be anything that would be contrary to that? Or what might not support that?
I thought he
Fought
said
it
he
for,
hoped he would
yeah.
die and then he would become
like
worth more.
appreciation of art.
Yeah. Here it's a conscious effort by George
Okay.
looking to make money,
To benefit from.
to benefit from. So this is a
So not really
personality trait.
altruism.
Yeah, yeah. So, again, George's behavior, most importantly for us though, allows the prompt to discuss the unconscious process of ego, and specifically the ego defense mechanisms. Whether or not it truly plays out in a situational comedies episode is another discussion. So altruism is considered to be a mature defense mechanism. Mature versus immature versus narcissistic are older terminologies with regard to the original way these unconscious processes were discussed through Valiant. In 2018, with the DSM-5, these defense mechanisms, I think, are less importantly mature versus immature, but otherwise adaptive versus non-adaptive or maladaptive. Okay, so even a mature defense mechanism could become maladaptive. And we see this with Jerry a lot because our lead character, almost in every episode, employs what defense mechanism? Humor. And there are a lot of things that go on in the plots and the subplots of the situational comedy that results from Jerry's humor, which is negative, maladaptive. But in this case, looking at it more concretely, George is buying up this person's art because he has a wish that this person dies and he makes money. And so there's another, even though the defense mechanisms are usually discussed in the context of personality disorders, despite the fact that we say that perhaps this is not a true defense mechanism then in George, it's still this part of a personality, maladaptive personality trait, if not disorder in George with regard to his egocentrism and maybe even narcissism. And it has antisocial traits, a total disregard for others' rights and safety. That's where George's mind is. By the way, before we go on with our next character analysis, just to get back to Roy real fast, very loose association, but he actually played the character of Bub in George Romero's Day of the Dead. Anytime we have an opportunity to at least allude to a zombie film, we should take that. So, zombie, as we discussed previously, for those of you who were on the AIPU for the first 2 weeks, I don't know if you got to see the recording, the video, but zombies link directly to the mood disorders, okay, specifically the etiology of mood disorders through a branch of psychiatry called immunopsychiatry. So, get a loose association there. The other characters in last night's episode were here at RWJ Medical School discussing the junior men.
Elaine again demonstrated some histrionics. She was completely uninterested.
They knocked us over there.
She was completely uninterested in Roy, and kind of only felt an obligation to go see him, which could be some altruism there, visit him in the hospital. But then when she finds out that Roy has lost a lot of weight and that she was the reason why he lost all that weight and that his attention was on her, after she broke up with him, she gets very happy because of that and kind of does a complete 180 and says like, oh, since you're paying me so much attention and since you're thin now, I want to go out with you again.
Yeah, you almost saw a very satisfied, proud look on her face when she learned the truth. Who, me? And that's certainly something there. I think histrionics as part of it is probably even more complicated than that with regard to what that was all about. Of course, when she sees him eating later, that being a sign of health post-operatively. For example. Not going anywhere. All right. Any other character here?
Kramer.
Kramer? What's up with Kramer?
I thought that his, when they were in the hospital room and they were discussing like watching the operation, it wasn't like a violation of rights in that like I'll physically violate boundaries, but it seemed very much like, oh, like, we gotta watch this show. You know, his guts are gonna be all over the place. Like, it's a show for us. And he's like also right there, the patient's right there. And even like in the aftermath, he didn't really show any like remorse for anything, really. Like after the mitt fell into the body.
Yeah, nothing. And I mean, I think one of the teaching points there that I think people around this table would greatly appreciate is the parallel of that scene with what you all have to go through with regard to patient-centered medicine and then finally getting to your clinical rotations and how not to act, right? And whether it's a surgical suite or just in the patient's presence. What we see there is the anti-medical school curriculum in terms of what not to do, okay, from an ethical point of view. Who else?
I thought we're like very small, but like George, I felt like he was like a dependent kind of personality, especially in the beginning when like they asked like, why don't you just go watch it at home? Like, oh, I want to be here, so I like have a feeling that I'm out or something. I don't know if he's like a clingy kind of guy, so I don't know if that's like a dependent kind of thing. Like he depends on Jerry or being around people to feel like to relieve his anxiety and stuff.
And we see this a lot with George, his dynamic with his best friend. We know that they've known each other since high school. He does seem very clingy and dependent on Jerry, needing Jerry's approval for every next step. Always runs things by Jerry. And that's what makes actually the comedy so funny, is that the things that should come naturally, he's got to say out loud, which a lot of us wouldn't. To his best friend and even other people, and it's Jerry's approval that he's always seeking. Jerry probably being a displaced father on him. We know from multiple episodes of Frank Costanza that he's anything but nurturing and reassuring and supportive. So yeah, now so you whether or not George actually meets clinical criteria for the dependent personality disorder, I'm not sure. But he certainly has that cardinal trait, and we see this very stable over the 9 seasons of situational comedy. Dependent personality disorder, clingy, submissive individuals who need constant affirmation for their every next step. It's a cluster C personality disorder, one of 3 from the cluster or group. What are the other 2?
Avoidant.
Obsessive compulsive
Or
personality.
CBD, good. Avoidant personality is just that. If you have any idea, if you forget or have any pause with regard to the defense mechanism, it's right here. Avoidance is a defense mechanism. And then OCPD. What is OCPD? How does it differ from OCD? Perfectionism, right? So it has nothing to do with obsessions or compulsions. So it's perfectionism, it's order, it's your type A personality. Good. By the way, since we're talking about personality disorders, we may as well cover the cluster A real fast. What are the cluster A personalities and what are the cardinal signs? Schizoid. What's a schizoid personality disorder?
Don't want to see people, they're okay with it.
Right, so social isolation and very content with leading the life of a hermit. Next. Schizotypal, which is?
Magical thinking.
Magical thinking. So individuals who have schizotypal may present similar to schizoid. And in both cases, because they may not necessarily feel conflicted, they may not come to clinical attention with a self-referral, and therefore on your board exam, more likely to be referred by a third party, the Board of Health. And then the final cluster A personality disorder? Paranoid personality disorder. Pervasive mistrust and a pervasive suspiciousness of others. Good. All right, junior men, anything else? What about Jerry? What's Jerry's focus in this episode?
He doesn't know the name of the dude, he met,
Right?
and he's trying to figure it out.
Instead of asking.
Yeah, he's ashamed, I guess.
So, I just wanted to briefly bring up that several of his guesses and the reasons why he guessed, I think, link quite easily to the sexual dysfunctions. And again, the sexual dysfunctions are one of 3 parts of the sexual disorders, the other 2 parts being the paraphilias or the sexual deviations, and the other one being gender dysphoria. Again, there were 3 parts of one chapter in the DSM-4. In the most recent revision of the DSM, there are 3 separate chapters. Again, sexual dysfunctions, I would check out the board review book I would open up your iPad or your laptop, I would Google images with regard to sexual response cycle and study by that visual, because the sexual dysfunctions are nothing more than aberrations, deficits in that sexual response cycle. Anything else from the junior mint? No, we're good. All right, we're meeting this afternoon. Probably have to cap there after,
Yeah.
right? So nothing. So we're back on Tuesday, I believe, with, I think it's Insidious, Sinister,
Paranormal.
and Paranormal Activity. It's a great trio. It's gonna be a great weekend. Great weekend. All right, have a great morning rounds. We'll catch everybody back here on Tuesday.